Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have Dr. Mike T. Nelson back on the podcast. I think this is number, I would say 3 or 4 now this time. Try to get you on probably about every 6 to 12 months or so, it seems. And yeah, I feel like every time I come in with a bunch of topics and then we go on tangents and I'm like, man, I didn't even get to hit on that. So like I said, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. Again, Dr. Mike, really appreciate your time, man. And thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So it's been, I think last time we talked probably was, I didn't look at the exact date, but I would say like within 6 to 12 months. Is there anything that's been going on with you? Anything big there in terms of your training, anything like that you've been doing or anything like that?
Training wise, I would say the biggest, not necessarily differences. I've been playing around more with different aerobic type stuff. And then the two things that are different, one of them is I think travel and just the ability to, if you want the greatest results, like probably live like a monk and just have the greatest amount of routine. Now, if you compete, that might not necessarily be to your best advantage, but if you're just general physique, body comp, health, I think that's good. I would also add recreation into that so you get some other movements, different movement patterns. Because every time I travel, I feel like I'm better able to travel now and absorb the stressors of travel. But I constantly forget that once I'm home for a block of 6 weeks, oh, it's so much easier. Just from the sleep, you're not in a different bed, nutrition's easier to control, you've got your same setup, you're not at whatever equipment they have, and there's ways to work around all of that. But every time I come home and I have a period of travel and then I've got 4 or 6 weeks at home, I'm always kind of reminded of, oh yeah, it is easier to make progress at home. And then I've been testing out the Beyond Power, the Vultra One device,
Yeah.
and I actually really like it. Like you've been around fitness long enough to see that, I don't know, fitness sometimes to be filled with supplements and equipments that's very gimmicky, and especially if they're expensive, you're just like, I don't know. But it's actually feels really smooth, and you can do isokinetic testing, you can do isometric testing. And what I really love is you can do on the same. So if you're doing a seated row, for example, I did this yesterday with 100 pounds of force concentric, and then I can add an eccentric component on top of that. So I've been scaling up the eccentric component. So yesterday I did 50 pounds extra. So as I pull the load towards me, it's 100 pounds. And at the end, it'll auto detect the end range of motion, and then it'll instantly go to 150. So now I'm going to take 4 to 6 seconds, like a triphasic type thing, to resist the load in that orientation. And it's crazy how even just 30%, 20% eccentric in some of it will make you ungodly sore again. And not that soreness is like the best equation to anything, but what I've noticed is other lifts have gone up more because of that, like probably 4 or 5 weeks into it. And I think for especially for people who've been training for a while, just it may just be a different stimulus. It may be the heavy eccentric loading. I don't know what it is. But yeah, just having different varieties of doing that and playing around with it. And yeah, I've actually liked it much better than I would have expected. And the last part is you can change everything on the screen. You don't necessarily need the app. They have one. But the other fear, I literally just talked to the owner this morning, is that my pet peeve, especially as a business owner, is like the death by 1,000 software cuts. And I get it that everything has a reoccurring membership now. I get it, like for investment purpose, you can show how many subscribers you have, your base, your monthly income. And as a business owner, like I like monthly income more than the volatility for sure. But my pet peeve is if you're going to drop a large chunk of change on something and then they're going to try to nickel and dime you for $10 to $20 a month just to use the stupid thing you bought. In this, they don't do that. You can program everything through the screen. So I can literally turn my phone off, go to the gym, put in an old school CD, and just write in my notebook like what I did, and I can just punch a few buttons on the screen and it'll change. So I don't have to be tied to my phone. I don't have to pay like a monthly fee. So that's been pretty fun.
Yeah, no, that is super nice. I thought you were going to tell me that they do charge that, but they don't charge
No,
that.
which is nice. Yeah.
So it sounds, I've seen it all over. I haven't been able to try it, but would you say it's similar to like the tonal in a way?
It is, but it feels a little different. Like I've only used the tonal 3 times in total, and when I talked to those guys, they were super cool. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff, I think, with changing strength curves and all that stuff. Because if I remember right, I think they're not direct drive, they're EM modified, so electromagnetic. So that gives you a lot of freedom of doing a bunch of different things. The tonal feels a little, I guess you could say, smoother, but a little odd, where this feels more like a cable machine, but the transitions they do are super smooth. So the transition from concentric to eccentric is quite smooth, and it'll also auto detect. So once you do the first rep, it'll say, okay, here's the start, here's the end. You don't have to program all that stuff in. So I haven't played with the heavier eccentrics or that stuff on the tonal. From what I've heard, it's pretty good. So I'd say from that aspect, they're similar, but maybe being too much of an old school person, I just like the idea of a cable versus an arm.
Yeah.
And I know that some of the tonal stuff now is a hybrid because you move the arm and you can move the cable and that type of thing. So maybe there's not really all that much difference, but yeah, I just like something about taking the unit and moving it. And I could do deadlifts with it in this position. I could put it up here. I could move it there. I don't know how much of an effect that makes. I guess with the new tonal, I heard you get pretty much any position you want, but I'm just probably so used to the concept of a cable type hookup. That's where my brain goes.
Yeah. So if you have a home gym, or I guess really any, I mean, I'm sure there's benefits that you could even bring this to an actual gym if you have even all the equipment. But I mean, you would say it could replace cables essentially if you don't have your own cable stack, or would you say that's not the case with these?
Yeah, at first I was very like, I don't know. Like I probably still, if I'm gonna build out a gym bigger, like I'm limited to space right now in the garage because we still have to get a car in, so I have to be able to move all this stuff over to one side if we need to. But after using it for probably 4 weeks now, I think I would actually use this in place of a cable stack,
Nice.
which I don't think I would have said that 4 or 5 weeks before. I feel like I'm just doing a commercial for them now, but because the you can do so much more with it you can't do with a traditional cable stack, and you can move it, and it's relatively portable, and you could mount it on a platform to do deadlifts and curls and that kind of stuff too. So I think that the it has a lot more ability. And if you look at what a cable stack costs, like those things are not
They're
cheap.
expensive.
They're expensive and you need the right height and that type of thing. The only thing I would say is that if you really like the old school and you're probably really doing like super heavy pull downs and stuff like that, like having a way to anchor your lower body is
Yeah.
probably useful. There's ways you can work around it on a power rack a little bit. That's probably the only one that I would say is probably a little bit different. But someone who's 6'3", like my pet peeve of most cable stacks is they're not tall enough either. Like you're like sitting off of the chair to try to get full extension all the way at the end. And I know Lead FTS and Sorinex and some other high end people make ones that are designed for bigger, taller athletes, but a lot of them you just feel like you're just like still this far from that end range of motion. If you're a tall monkey arm person like I am, then the cable stack setup is probably going to be pretty darn expensive too.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's super versatile, especially for a home gym in particular. And as you said, you can do different things with it that you can't do with a normal cable stack. Like I said, even bringing it to a gym could potentially be helpful as well too. So you mentioned that you're doing different aerobic type stuff. Is there anything specific that you're working on there or doing differently?
Yeah, so I did the flexible meathead cardio course, and
Yeah.
the level one is just the aerobic stuff because I realized the anaerobic-y, more metcon type stuff is a lot more sexy now. But what I've realized, and I'm sure you've realized this and everyone else has too, that if your aerobic base sucks, like you just can't do a lot of high quality anaerobic stuff. Yeah, there's ways you can do it and you can detune it and you can add more rest and there's ways you can work around it. But what I found is just faster is just do old school aerobic, base building, all the boring stuff that meatheads like us don't like doing. I will put myself in that camp. But what I realize, the more I do of it, the better I just feel, and my recovery, my energy level, my ability to concentrate, my ability to take insults from travel. And I went to a concert last night, so I didn't get home, didn't get to bed till like after midnight. All that stuff is just so much better. And that when I go to do high intensity intervals, like now I can do a lot higher quality work. I can do a lot more work of them. So as you do, let's say you're just doing 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, right? You're doing like a Wingate type thing with 1-to-1 ratios. If your aerobic system is really bad, like you might not make it past 2 or 3 or 4 rounds if you are holding that same wattage or within 5 to 10%. because as you go through them, the contribution to the aerobic system is actually much higher because your aerobic system during the rest periods has to replenish that level of ATP in order for you to execute again. So I've been just playing around with, probably to the detriment of my own training for years, of what is like the most time effective ways of doing it. And one of the ones that to me was the most effective that I haven't seen used by anyone else, I'm sure there's probably people who use it, but they just call like a simple 6 minute progressive. So if you've got an assault bike or you've got a rower, just literally walk into your gym or wherever you're at, and you don't necessarily need to do a warm up. Make sure your movement's good. Like I do some RPR and stuff beforehand for activation. And then you're going to start at a set rate. But because you're starting at that rate or a little bit higher, your heart rate's going to be relatively low because you literally just got on. And you're not going at an all out max rate. You're like roughly 70%. And you look for a heart rate profile that'll come up and flatten out. But the peak of that is probably going to be maybe zone 4 if you're using zones. So most of the time, you're going to be about half is going to be below zone 4, half is going to be around that zone 4 time frame. And what you realize is that early part of it serves as almost like a nice warm up. Your heart rate's going to start escalating, and you actually will get about 3 minutes in a VO2 max interval. But because it's so short, even if you screw up everything, it's only 6 minutes. So it's like this rate limiter where even if you don't have the exact intensity correct, because the time domain is so short, it's really hard to completely torch yourself on it. And I found just by pushing frequency on that, like 6 days a week, you can make some pretty nice gains, especially if your VO2 max is a little bit lower. And you're literally talking about a total time of 36 minutes a week. And this is not high intensity either. Like you don't need to watch 4 David Goggins videos and drink 8 cups of coffee to motivate yourself to do it either. You can get on there when you're half awake, and by 1 minute you're into it and you're relatively awake. So I found that's been super useful. And then just planning out a lot more zone 3 stuff is what I found. Like I know zone 2 is all sexy, and there's a time and a place I think to do zone 2, but especially if you're a little bit more on the detrained area, I just find doing zone 2 to start is almost a waste of time. Because yes, you do see maybe some more mitochondrial things, like there are some benefits, but the minimum you need is probably 2 to 3 hours accumulated of zone 2 a week. And you probably want to run that for 6 to 8 weeks. And even if you do that, unless you were just a high-end cyclist who's almost detraining or allowing like compensation, you're not going to see a huge increase in your VO2 max. Now, at some point, would you need to go back and address your base and make it bigger so you can do more interval work? Yes, I think you do. But for most people, I just have them start in zone 3 work. So if they're really good and they just do the 6 minute progressives and they got a little bit more time, then I'll have them switch modalities and maybe use a bike if they did 6 minutes on the rower. And I'll say just match that time and heart rate on the bike. So start with 6 minutes on the rower and then just 6 minutes steady state on the bike, and just do it immediately after the rower. Like you don't need to race and run, but within 1 to 2 minutes. Your heart rate's already elevated. You just look at your average you had on your row and you just try to match that on the bike. And you just scale that up to probably around 20 minutes per day, and you're probably going to be pretty good. Like I would add some VO2 max intervals once a week. But for someone who's looking for just an AM routine or even a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that to do, I think utilizing a lot of zone 3, maybe low end zone 4 work is extremely underrated for the amount of time you would invest in it.
So when we're talking, because that's the thing, I feel like when sometimes you hear aerobic talk, people automatically assume that's like zone 2 type training. And so what
Right.
you're saying is there's different ways to obviously hit the aerobic system. It doesn't necessarily have to be that long, slow distance. So it sounds like you're doing some more like kind of interval style, but you're not necessarily going to zone 5 every single time you do that, or the high end. It's
No.
just you're going a little bit lower, but you're building up that time in that zone. Again, not all at one time, but like through intervals and stuff like that. And then you're also saying, hey, doing some more like kind of zone 3 type work, just because again, most people, from my understanding, the amount that they're doing isn't necessarily going to warrant them to have to do like super low intensity type stuff.
No. As you get into, if you're a high level cyclist or maybe even triathlon competitor, you're definitely going to have to do more of a polarized approach. You want everything possible to hit those high intensity intervals, or there's different ways of looking at that. And then you probably need to do a lot of base work. Now, the question I've always had with those studies is, at what point is the base work helping you with mitochondrial and maybe aerobic adaptations? Or if you've ever worked with crazy cyclists, they just want to go ride all the time, right? It's like the dog that wants to run all the time and chase the car. So the fact that they're doing zone two means they were not doing some higher intensity stuff. Because left to their own devices, what I've noticed is that they all want to do more higher intensity work. And sometimes they can recover from that. And again, there's a time and a place. But as you reach that higher end, it's almost like strength athletes. Like at some point, if you're squatting 800 pounds, you're not going to squat 800 pounds every day, right? You get to the point where you're so strong that you just can't do that. Your output is so high. Granted, you're adapted to it, but there's still a higher cost with that than squatting 400. So you just can't seek and do that exposure all the time. So when you go there, like you definitely want the intensity to match, but you can't do a lot of frequency. I think that's the same thing with cardio stuff. Like you can't do a lot of zone five, light your nutsack on fire and snort pre-workout. Like you can't do that stuff all the time without just torching your nervous system or seeing just a dramatic drop in your output. So I do think in those high level athletes, I think the zone two is probably more recovery and prevents them from doing a lot of higher intensity work that would be probably not beneficial. It's like the old rumor of the Bulgarian system of they asked one of the Bulgarian coaches like, "Hey, I heard you got better results when you went from training 3 times a day to 4 times a day. Oh, why is that? You get more frequently exposure and hormonal and all this stuff." And he's, "No, we found if we put an evening session in, all the lifters didn't go out to the bar and get drunk. Like it had nothing to do with more practice or higher frequency or anything else. It was just the fact that they weren't doing all the negative stuff that was screwing up their performance then." So I think there might be some of that with zone two and high level athletes.
Yeah, it almost by adding that in, they're not doing other things that are gonna not
Right.
be beneficial. Yeah, that makes sense. So for someone that does like, again, I like how you hit on like the meatheads particularly, right? Because I feel like
Yeah.
again, somebody who enjoys weight training and things like that. So if someone is lifting, say 3 to 4 times a day, what have you found to be the most helpful? Is it like 3 to 4 times a week, or what is that? Does it just depend as well too in terms of I guess their recovery and everything like that?
Yeah. So the template I've gone back to like over and over again is in general, lift some stuff Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Saturday might be an optional day depending on your goals. Do some dedicated actual cardiovascular training where you're looking to see an adaptation. So you're looking to see more performance over time. Do a dedicated block of that Tuesday, Thursday. Again, I usually go Saturday. Sunday's like an off day or a zone two day if you want. So it's split half and half. I think you can make pretty good progress on that. But what I found is if you really want to increase your aerobic capacity, like frequency is your friend. So with that, I like 5 to 6 days a week of some aerobic stuff. And so the things I've done in the course is if you can only train once per day and you're already at a moderate to decent level cardiovascular, let's say your VO2 max is in the 40s, so let's say it's low 40, like low 41. That's not bad. I think hitting 50, higher 40s, I think you will see some benefit. So I would do some dedicated cardio Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So you're doing it on your non-lifting days. And then you would either add the AM 6 minute progressive or before you're lifting, if you've got access to a rower, do a 500 meter or a 1,000 meter row. It's going to be 2 to 4 minutes, again, depending upon your level where you're at. But make sure your RP is only a 7 or an 8. And what I found was that was enough to get some good quality work in, but not enough that it would torch you and screw up your lifting session. Now, again, if you're going to do a complete, I have a lower body thing I do for 2 hours. Like I'm probably not going to do that before my lower body thing, but for everything else, I found it's pretty good. And so you get a little bit more high quality work. And in my testing, I found that some of my grip stuff and some of my lifts were actually better after that type of warm up. Now, again, the caveat there is that was done mostly in the winter. I haven't seen as big of a transfer in the summer. It was probably a temperature thing, like just getting your body and your physiology up to temperature instead of the 43 degrees of what it is in the garage gym.
Yep.
I think that probably helps more than anything else. But that's a pretty good way. People can make pretty good progress with only doing one session once a day. Again, I think if you're going to buy any type of equipment, just having the ability to have a rower or a salt bike are probably my two favorite. It's concentric only. Your body weight is support. It's not a lot of eccentric load. You get automatically get output. Just having that in your home, like let's say you've got one in your background there, just saves you so much time. And I mean, you can hop on and do 6 minutes, and it doesn't really phase you much in terms of your total day-to-day experience either.
Yeah, I found with this, the one I have behind me, you mentioned like the salt bike thing. Like I could see where like for the more interval style stuff, I would imagine that's probably a little bit easier on a rower and a salt bike versus this regular stationary bike, just because I can get up to the intensity, but I find it to be a little bit harder because you are just using your lower body. I don't know if that's a
Yes.
thing or not, but like that's what I have found. I can get there, but I do find I feel like it'd be a lot easier to do it on the modalities that you talked about specifically. Now, the longer cardio sessions, 20, 30, 40 minutes, I find that to be a little bit better because I feel like the salt
Yes.
bike can be hard to overshoot it.
Oh, just stupid.
So it sounds like the kind of template is then, like you said, kind of weight training 3 to 4 times a week, potentially there with that. And then like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I think you said that's where you're going to do maybe those a little bit longer ones, right? Like zone kind of three-ish. And then the days you said potentially adding in 2 more days. And those are going to be more of those like quicker style interval session ones that you were talking about there. But the goal with those is not necessarily, like you said, not to just go all out the entire time. It's like you said, RPE 7, 8, and something that you can maintain that your output throughout each interval versus going all out and then by the end of it you're just so gassed that you can't keep up with what you're doing initially.
Yeah, yeah, and that kind of almost serves as your warm-up because most people's warm-ups are, in my opinion, are just stupid. Like they just, I get on the bike, I do this or that. Their temperature didn't even really go up. Like I don't know really what they're doing, so I would rather have it be shorter and more focused and more dedicated on what they're doing. And then the last part is if you really want to see your VO2 max go up, at some point you're probably going to have to program intervals into one of those aerobic days, right? Where you want to hit 2 to 8 minutes at VO2 max, rest completely, and then hit that again. Like that by far and away, if you look at the literature, that is going to be the biggest driver that is going to push up your VO2 max or your aerobic metabolism. The catch with that is you can't just only do that because again, you're back to the problem of you just can't recover fast enough to recover from that. So you're left with it's like the heavy squats. If you really want to increase your 1RM in squatting, then you probably need to lift heavy and do a heavy 1RM. The hard part is again, you can't do that all the time. So what accessory work do you do? Do you change the movement? Do you change the sets? Do you change the reps, the frequency? You get into all this stuff related to transfer. Cardiovascular training is the same way. Like those high intensity intervals, if you can hold that output, that will have the biggest and best transfer to your VO2 max, but you can't do that all the time. Like even high level athletes, if they're really pushing those, 2 times a week is a lot. And that usually means they're going to have to drop one of their lifting days in place of it. So if I'm really pushing my VO2 max, I have these intervals in the course from my buddy Dr. Kenneth J. And they're absolutely just brutal. It's like these 5 rounds of progressive intervals, and then you do these 5 back to back with 30 seconds rest. That's one round, and then each week we'll add another round. And so it tapers all the way up to 5 rounds, which will probably take me 50 total minutes, 60 minutes. But you're doing 7,500 meters over that course. So you're doing a lot of volume, but it's at a pretty high intensity. And I definitely have to replace a lifting day with that in its place. But again, it works really well. But again, you're back to okay, for just take a phase and figure out, yeah, you can probably make some pretty good concurrent gains for sure. If your VO2 max is low, by all means, ride that horse as long as you can. But then at some point, you might have to decide if you're limited on time or resources or recovery. Okay, what is my priority? So I usually like people to say, okay, take a 6 to 8 week block. Yeah, you'll still probably make progress lifting, but say, okay, here's my goal. I'm going to hammer these intervals. I'm going to give up a lifting day, and I want to move my VO2 max up, and then I'm going to put it back on maintenance again and go back to lifting as more of the priority. Because at some point, and you've seen this with lifting too, that people are like, I want to increase my squat, bench, and dead because I'm a power lifter. Great. Yeah, if you don't lift a lot, you can easily do that. But as you've seen too, and even intermediate lifters, God, I can't think of a time where an intermediate to semi-advanced lifter has dramatically increased all three. You're back to, okay, let's really take this phase and really work on the deadlift as our number one priority, or the bench, or the squat. Right? Again, you have to prioritize what you want to do, focus on that for a period of time, and then shift to the next thing.
So in that example, you said at some point, if you really want to bring up your VO2 max to do that kind of interval that you just said there, where it's pretty intense, like you said, what 2 to 8 minutes, and was it a 2 to 8 minute rest where it would be 1 to 1, or is that where the rest would be a little bit shorter there?
Yeah, so I like what do you call like a biofeedback method. And I talk about this with Cal Dietz in the Triphasic 2 training book. Just allow your heart rate to come back down below 100 or maybe even 90. And sometimes it might even be a little bit lower than that. And what you'll find is, I call this like an ARP or asymmetric rest period. When you do the first round, let's say you're, for simple math, right? Let's say you're on the rower. Let's say your output is 200 watts, so your 2K time is about 8 minutes. So you would want to hit at least 200 watts for 2 to 8 minutes, right? So let's say we're going to do 5 minute rounds. Cool. So I'm going to do 200 watts. I'm going to do 5 minutes. That means my average watts has to be there for those whole 5 minutes. I'm going to rest completely until my heart rate goes below, I'll use like 90. Your first round, like that might only be like a minute and a half.
I
Cool.
see.
Okay, now I'm going to do next round. My goal is hit 200 watts on average for the full 5 minutes. Great. Ooh, okay, I'm supposed to do 3 rounds today. It might take 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes for your heart rate to come all the way back down again. Now do the next one. Because you don't want to compromise the output that you're going to do, and you're going to allow yourself to rest long enough to do that output again. Because the biggest mistake people make is, I'm going to do a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. Yeah, in some longer intervals, you might do okay with that. But as those intervals get shorter and higher intensity, like a 1-to-1 work rest ratio is, in my opinion, pretty advanced. If you go all the way down and you scale that down to 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, you have to be a pretty bunch of badass to do that for 10 rounds and not see much of a drop off at a high wattage. That takes a massive aerobic base to pull that off. So even if we go back to the intervals, I like just leaving the rest period open-ended, but having it be a biological feedback marker. Meaning, okay, once your heart rate is below 90, now you go again. That's a marker telling me that your system has recovered, because that'll change day to day, week to week, person to person. Okay, now let's hit it again, because I don't want to compromise the output for the sake of the rest period.
I like that. So you're, like you said, you're auto-regulating the rest time essentially
Yeah,
to where you're at there with that
exactly.
to make sure but the goal being like, I guess you wouldn't be fully rested, but you want to be rested enough to where you can maintain that output there and you don't see it drop off too much. And
Right, because you're doing 100% of it. So, in theory, if you did an all-out test, you said you could get 8 minutes, but I'm only having you do 5 minutes of that now, right? Because I don't want the RPE to be a 9.5 again, because I want you to repeat some of that work. So, what are you doing, right? So, let's say you do 3 rounds of that. So now you got 5, 10, you got 15 minutes of actual work at the pace that you need to improve. You go back to the squat example, right? Let's say your max squat is 405. And I think the rule of 90% is pretty good. If you could go in and hit 385 for singles in a training session, and you could do that for 5, 6, 7 singles, that's pretty badass. I'd say that's a really good, effective training session. Is that an all-out 1RM? No, but look at how much frequency you've accumulated at a load that's well in excess of 90% of your 1RM. It's the exact same idea. It's the
yeah,
exact same principle. You're just applying it to a different domain.
I'm assuming when most people, go about this wrong, I would imagine either you probably see three things. I would imagine. I just want one, you see someone overdo it, right? Like they go too
Yep.
hard and then they can't, then they're not actually getting the adaptation that they want because they went too hard. But then I'm assuming there's probably people that don't go hard enough. And then I would imagine there's also a subset of people that do too much like of that type of training all the time.
Yeah, what you typically see is exactly that, like a hybrid of all of them. Like you'll see people start to do aerobic stuff and it's like, well, they had no plan. I just got on a bike. So, okay, like what are you trying to do? I don't know. I was just tired. I sweat a lot. My heart rate came up. Okay, cool. And then you have the people who have read the Tabata study one too often or just heard about it and they're like, I got to go the other way. I got to have like just incomplete rest, like 20 seconds all out and 10 seconds rest. And what you realize, the Tabata study was never meant to be replicated for 5 or 6 rounds. They're doing 170% of their VO2 max to start. You can't do that with any lifting mechanism. You need like a rower, a salt bike, and it's a full body thing to even attempt to try to pull that off. And yeah, and the last part is not to rip on the CrossFit crowd, but the fatigue is everything crowd of the paper said, oh my God, the Norwegian 4x4 method. I heard such and such researcher talk about this is like the be all end all, the bee's knees. And yeah, great study, like really well done. And they'll go out and they'll try to do 4 rounds at 4 minutes. But if you look at their output between round 1 and round 4, I've seen some as low as like 50% of round 1. It's
Wow.
yeah, you get like the gonadal fortitude award, but in terms of physiologic output, and then they get stuck like 3 to 4 weeks in. They're like, I don't know, man, like my VO2 max is not going up. I can't figure out what's going on. And man, it's harder and harder to do these intervals. It's just taking so much work, but you've allowed your output to scale down. So you're practicing, you're putting out effort, but it's not high quality effort. So one of the biggest things I got from this was I remember going to a meeting with Cal Dietz years ago when we were working on the Triphysic 2 book. We're sitting there and he's drawing all this shit on a whiteboard for 40 minutes. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, like how the hell am I ever going to explain this in a written book that's not a video? And at the end, I asked him, like, okay, so for lifting, even aerobic stuff, you're saying do high quality work first and then repeat it. And he kind of looks at me and he's, yeah. So you have to do the high quality work first and then you worry about repeating it. Most people have that inversed. They're like, they want to repeat it because it was the Norwegian 4x4. It said I had to do 4 rounds of 4 minutes. So they're so worried about getting that volume in on day one that they don't look at the output or they don't look at the quality of what they were doing. Again, back to the squat analogy, it'd be like, I was told the Bill Starr 5x5 method. Great method. I love it. But if, you know, set 4 and set 5, your squat looks like a good morning, you're not really training the same thing anymore. Yeah, you got the weight up, but I would argue that you just start at maybe 2 or 3 sets and make them high quality first.
So on these days where you're doing a little bit of the slower type stuff, is there a time frame that you try to hit? Is it like 30 minutes or is it just what you can do? And again, same thing. It's like what you can, what provides the most high quality type work as well too, I would just imagine.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, a rough cutoff is if you're doing zone 3, maybe even low zone 4, and you're just a meathead, you're not an aerobic athlete, and you're able to do that, let's say 3 times a week, you can get it really far by just doing a high quality 20 minutes. Like I'd say even 30 minutes is where I would cap it. Will you still see some benefits from there if you're a little bit more advanced? Yes. Could you pull it off? Yes, but I think you're on that flatter part of the curve where you're starting to see diminishing returns. I've talked to your coach, Brian, about that. I've talked to my buddy, Dr. Kenneth J., a bunch of other people, Andy Gelpin, and all these other guys. And that the general consensus, while it's anecdotal, is the 20 to 30 minute mark. Like, I think you're reaching the diminishing returns at that point. So if you're on a rower and you're in moderately decent shape, it'd be like row a 5K Tuesday and Thursday. If you can do that in your heart rate zone 3, zone 4, maybe you touch zone 5 for just a bit at the end. If you even just do that. So like my simple maintenance for meatheads is, let's say you don't care about intervals, you just want to maintain aerobic base, your schedule is just batshit crazy. You can only train 3 times a week to do aerobic stuff because you're lifting 3 times a week. You have to take Sundays off. Just row a 5K 3 times a week. Like just doing that, you'll maintain a massive portion of your aerobic base. And some people might even go up a little bit. Now, will you lose some of that interval performance, that high intensity stuff? Yeah, you will. But in my experience, you can get that back in 2 to 4 weeks, like really fast. Versus, yeah, I did F all nothing and I just quit entirely. Like, you just regress really fast.
Yeah, it's super interesting just because for me, it's like I'm at this point where I want to improve my aerobic base. And so like for me, finding what is that right amount. Brian kind of has me doing, so I'll do 3 days. I'll do a more zone 3 type session. He does have me doing one kind of zone 2. It's like I try to do like 45, 60 minutes interval style one day a week. And then I play hockey once a week as well too, which
Oh, there you go.
I count that as like to me, it's nice conditioning work
Totally.
there. What, based on that, is there anything that you would like, is that, again, I'm sure it all comes down to what I do within it in terms of progression and stuff like that, but is that kind of what you would recommend for someone that is looking to, I love the weight training and I want to continue to try and get as jacked as I can, but I'm really diving into the aerobic system and improving my conditioning and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say that's really good. The only change I would make, which I think he would probably agree, is if you said, okay, my number one priority above all else is to really push my VO2 max, would be playing with the intervals and possibly adding those on another day. But again, you're probably going to trade off some type of lifting performance, and there's going to be a trade off somewhere there too.
Yeah. But again, that base though really just comes down to just doing more of that lower intensity type stuff. And that's going to allow you to really be able to push that higher end type stuff eventually. And you're going to get the other benefits, I feel, of the recovery as well too, right? That you talk about there.
Yeah, and I think that's my selling point to meatheads, and I was in this area is At some point, you love lifting, you just want to do more volume because if you can do more high quality output, like you are going to get to your goals faster. Now, again, you also realize you're probably getting close to that part of the curve where it's flattening out. I'm under no delusions that if I'm typically at home, like I'll train 10 to 15 hours a week. Could I get maybe 90% of those results in half that time? I probably could, but to me, that trade-off of the extra time is worth it because that's what I love doing and that's what my goals are. So I'm okay with that trade-off. But I think what most people run into when they're lifting is at some point they can't do more dense work with keeping the quality high. And a lot of times they can't even lift 3 or 4 days a week because their recovery is so impaired. And typically they're like sleep is better, like some of them are even doing TRT, like their nutrition is halfway decent. But we measure their aerobic system and it's, yeah, bro, your VO2 max is 31. And as a general population, that might be passable, but as an athlete, that's like pretty trash bin horrible. And then once they get to even just the low 40s, they're like, oh my God, I don't have to rest 3 to 4 minutes between sets. Like I can do a lot more work. I can keep the quality high. Like I'm more resistant to stress. I can get more things done. I cognitively feel so much better. I know Brian's talked a lot about this too. Like the cognitive benefits are way not talked about enough because most of these people have to work, right? Whether they run their own business or work for someone or whatever else. So, yeah, so I think there's a lot of benefits to it if it's done in an intelligent fashion.
Yeah, not
I
just
kind of went
yeah.
off on a long tangent there. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I dove real again, being someone that loves lifting weights, I really dove into the hypertrophy side of things, and
Yeah.
I feel like I understand what you need to do there. The aerobic system and like building your cardiovascular system, I feel like for me, it's just exploring exploring all these things, and it's something that I just feel like there's a lot of different ways I feel like to get there. I'm really enjoying kind of learning more about it, and it's super important. I feel like it's for whatever reason that I don't know, maybe it is straightforward. It just doesn't seem as straightforward as like lifting for hypertrophy in terms of like programming. There's a lot of different ways that I feel like you can go about it essentially.
Yeah, I think the hard part is there's a lot more options, and a lot of that depends upon where you're starting from. If you, I had a power lifter, had a whole bunch of issues, recovery issues, all sorts of stuff. We tested her VO2 max was like 22. Or no, was it maybe even lower than that? I think she might even been 12 or 13. I don't know. It was like one of the lowest numbers I've ever seen. And just having her do some basic aerobic stuff, like 6 months later, she's, oh my God, I feel so much better and I can lift more and progress is better. So I think there's the lower and the detrained you are, just like if you're more new to lifting, like bro, just go lift, pick a program. Yeah, shit, do DeLorme 3x10 that's been around for freaking decades. Do Bill Starr 5x5. Do Vince Garanda 8x8. I don't care. Just do something, do it with high quality, and you're going to be fine. After you've been doing that for many decades, Christ, I've been doing this shit for now, let's go over 3 decades. Like little nuances, little things like that probably matter more. Once your VO2 max is 50 or above, which I think for meatheads is probably as best as you would need to go unless you've got something super competitive. As you're in the 20s and 30s, like just 6 minute progressives, add a few 1Ks, I think you're probably good. Once you get in the 40s, you probably need to be a little bit more hyper specific. When I do have a program, if your VO2 max is 50 or above, at that point, if you really want to go from 50 to 53 or 55, you're probably going to have to be a lot more dedicated in terms of time and recovery resources to do that.
That's probably where maybe some of this gets confusing is eventually there comes that point to where it's okay, if you want to be as jacked as possible, you also want to continue to push up. Like you said there, once you get to around 50, it's okay. The benefits of going higher from a VO2 max standpoint, if you don't have specific endurance type goals or anything like that, is that worth the time? And then you're probably going to run into what other probably bottlenecks in terms of recovery. And then
Oh, sure.
now you're not going to be able to dedicate as much time to your strength training because you're
Yep.
going to need to focus more on that. And there's always these bottlenecks that we end up running into there that people don't think about. They just think they can do whatever they want. And unfortunately, that's not, most people have other shit going on that they have to take care of. And that digs into their recovery debt and just stress load on their body.
Yeah. And even if you have the ability to dedicate more time to training, at some point you just can't recover. And so it's interesting. Like the longer I've been training, I think the more high quality volume I can do, but it's definitely variable. So I try to make like my Monday and Saturday sessions. So Monday is more just volume upper body, light grip stuff. Saturday is more volume lower body, more quad based stuff for snowboarding, kiteboarding, that kind of stuff, and then isometrics for grip stuff. So I try to make those 2 days what I call open-ended, meaning that if the session's going well, I have enough time in my schedule that it can go 2 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I'm okay. If it's not going well, last week I ended up cutting the lower body session at an hour and 37 minutes, right? So I like having those two sessions that are more open-ended. But even in theory, if I could have all my sessions be open-ended, at some point you're not doing high quality work. You're just digging a bigger ditch of fatigue that you're going to have to recover from. And the hardest part is figuring out you're like surfing on that edge. Like, where is that edge?
Yep.
And being able to just be like, I'm not really doing any more productive work. I'm just gonna, my best thing I can do now is just walk out of the gym. And it's hard to do that when you like doing it. Not all sessions are fun, but I think as you get older, I think you get more experience of trying to appreciate where that edge is. And you can definitely do a distress session and force yourself through it, but is there really any benefit to it? I think when you're new, it's just like a really hard concept to teach
Oh
people
yeah.
to start. I don't know. I haven't found a way of teaching them how to do that other than using auto-regulatory methods, which I really like. I think that's probably like the best thing you can do. So it's auto-regulated within a system and a framework. I think that's probably the best way.
You mentioned earlier too, like you're talking about when you travel, it's just, hey, when I travel, just being at home and like you said, being a monk, like that's going to be the best way for you to make progress. And so I feel like a lot of people don't like understand that again, that like there are those bottlenecks and sometimes we just have to like work with what we have and you can't really push past that, unfortunately. I think a lot
Oh
of people
yeah.
think they can just push past that. I feel like people that are going to that listen to this, they're not the person that we need to go get them to just go and train. Like they're already training, they're already doing these
Yep.
things. And for them, it's more so balancing their life with all this stuff. And like, how do you what's the right intensity, what's the right frequency to do that? And like you said, there's just going to be some times where you just have these constraints that unfortunately you just can't like really work through and you just have to be more strategic with your training, like you were saying there. And yeah, like you said, I just find that's the hardest part for a lot of people that are more in that intermediate and then they have a ton of like life stress going on. And until we fix those things, it's like you're not going to be able to push as much as you want. You can push as much as you want, but you're going to find that you're spinning your wheels and like you said, digging yourself into that bigger recovery debt and low HRV and everything like that.
Yeah. And the older I've gotten, the more you do this with clients too. If you've got more stuff coming up, like having a plan is super beneficial. I don't know who I was talking to the other day. You ever gone to a conference and you like sometimes even plan out like where you're gonna lift, what you're gonna do? Like I have my assistant send me pictures of the hotel gym. So like a week before, like the week before, I know what I'm gonna do that week. So I also know the week before what I need to do that week here at home that I won't be able to do when I'm traveling. And then sometimes, like I did this at ISSN, I got in Sunday. So the conference started at noon on Monday. So I could get up Monday, take an Uber to the Redcon 1 gym that was there, pay their drop in fee, take an Uber back. And that was my long session of the week. So that was like a 2.5 hour session. But I knew Sunday was an off day. I got everything done in the week before. But I also knew once the conference started, historically, I'm probably not making it to the gym until maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday. It's just literally, could I change something to do that? Yes, but to me, it's like I only get this opportunity once a year. I want to maximize the interactions and see people and hang out and just worry about being present. So I did a 2 hour and 40 minute session Monday morning and then didn't train again until Thursday. Was it ideal? No. Was it good enough? Yeah, yeah, it was fine. But I think if I hadn't planned ahead of time and didn't have that session on Monday, now it went from a gap of, okay, now it's 5 days I didn't do anything at all versus 2.5-ish days. I
Or you're
think there's
trying
a big difference.
or you're trying to like squeeze in some half-ass workout where you're under recovered in between there because you feel
Yeah,
like you need
yeah,
to do it.
yeah, yeah. And again, I have done those. Like I did a light session Thursday morning just to get some movement in so I
Yeah.
didn't look like a human cashew. But I was under no illusions that was a normal training session. That was just like, just get back to feeling somewhat normal, have 20 minutes of some tension to get something done is going to be better than nothing. But yeah,
Well,
I totally agree.
yeah, we can, and this maybe comes back to utilizing zone two from time to time. Like we can utilize those sessions when you're under, like you got a lot going on, like you said, you're traveling or whatever, you just have a lot going on. It's okay. Like, yes, I guess there probably is place and time where it's like, hey, I'm just not going to do anything. But I'm sure you still would be like, hey, let's at the very least get in some sort of, like you said, that type of workout there where that's probably going to help with recovery and it's going to help you move forward. But you're also not like digging yourself into that huge recovery debt there.
Yeah, and that's the nice part about strength training, even cardiovascular stuff, is it's super easy to change it to get something done. So I did a little experiment where my goal was how many days in a row could I do some type of cardiovascular training? So I started this when we were in Mexico in February. And the only thing I had down there was really running. There wasn't really a gym. I did find one gym that had these interesting little weights on ropes and stuff like that. It was all wood, and the bench press, you looked like you're going to kill yourself on it because the bench was going to break and shit. So I only went to there like once, but I'm like, okay, how many days in a row can I do it? Again, down there was pretty easy, but then I had more travel. Was at a conference in Vegas. Was in Vegas for 5 days, and then we're down in South Padre kiteboarding. And so what I realized was, once you get a streak going, like you don't really want to break it. And so some days it was even just a mile run on the beach before the day, or 20 minutes of zone two at 9 o'clock at night after I got done kiteboarding or whatever. So it was you could always modify the intensity. And what I found was exactly what you said. Like in general, I always felt better doing something. And over that period, I ended up making it, 96 days. I had to stop because I had some more tattoo work done, so I couldn't exercise for 4 days after that. But up until that point, like I actually made pretty good progress. And were any one of those sessions, I would say, heroic or even very long? Not really. But I think again, it's just we undervalue, I think, the consistency of doing something that's going to be beneficial than nothing. And you still have to be intelligent with your programming. You can't just show up and do mindless stuff. But if you modify it to the intensity and what you're able to do, I just think that violent consistency day in and day out is like the thing nobody wants to talk about. But yet you look at every single person who's ever been successful doing anything, and it's just consistency. Even Jordan, who is very talented as a basketball player, was known for just consistency of showing up and practice, and especially as he got older in his career. So I think even at the elite of the elite, it still applies there.
And that's you talk. I think you had an email on this the other day that you stress and de-stress training, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what you're like that concept, right? Of applying that at the right time. And again, not everything we want to be that de-stress type training or distress, not de-stress, distress.
Yeah. The distress is what, and I like David Goggins, but he's like the poster boy for distress training. And that's going to come at a high cost, which I think, I had never met the guy, but I think he would probably even admit. But that's what seems to be Instagram and everything is you always see the everybody wants to post about the crazy session they had, and there's a time and a place for that for sure, by all means. But I found that 90 to 98% of your training should be eustress. Like Dan John says, just punch the clock. Like go in, get some high quality work done, and then just leave. Most of your sessions are probably going to be on average. Like you will have those sessions where everything feels pretty good and everything is great. Yeah, do more work on those days. You'll have other days where you're like, oh my God, why am I here? Why did I show up? And you'll have a few sessions a year where it's just not there and you just walk out early. Fine. But I think it's that punch the clock, use stress training, do something you can recover from in a day or two so you can come back and do it again. I just think that is, even from a physiology standpoint, where you look at frequency or triggering muscle protein, synthetic response, healing, immune system, motor learning, whatever, like all those things line up with more of a eustress model.
Yeah. Super interesting stuff. We hit on ISSN. I wasn't able to make it. I haven't been able to make it the last couple of years, but like every time, like when the people start posting, I'm like, man, I wish I was freaking there. Like that's I freaking love that. Just 2 or 3 days of just people
Oh
just
yeah.
posting. Like it's I've been twice and I freaking love it. Like I'm really hoping I can get there next year. So since I had a little bit of FOMO there, I'm just curious. What was there any good talks, any like takeaways or anything like that? Or yeah,
There's always interesting stuff there. And just, I think science kind of goes in waves. Like you will have years where it's, oh wow, that was much more air quotes borderline revolutionary as much as there is anything revolutionary in science. I'd say this year was more an average year, not in a derogatory sense. There just sometimes isn't as many new and novel things. And we're always, myself included, like seeking those new and novel things. But again, it was great to see all the people, hang out with them. Just even the conversations you have on the side are super interesting. There may be some interesting stuff with more like protein fractions like coming out. I think if I was a supplement designer, that's where I would be looking at different types of protein for different types of marketing, maybe pre-sleep or pre-workout or immune or things like that. There's some cool stuff on that. They did have some stuff from the enhanced games, which is super interesting in Vegas, which I think it'll be next year. And they did have a swimmer who was using their enhanced protocol break a world record in an official, I mean, it's not official, but an actual timed event. The crazy part was he was swimming by himself. Like he wasn't competing against anyone else. I won't say who I talked to, but I talked to a source who said that he did it wearing one of the shark suits and without the suit. So he did it where we just with sort of technology and without. And they didn't disclose what type of protocol he used, but it was very basic. And the guy said that it would bodybuilders would laugh at it, that it was not a super high amount of exogenous substances. And he broke currently what is the world record. Now, again, not sanctions, unofficial, all that kind of stuff. But I thought that was super fascinating. And they're giving out pretty large prizes and timed events for different athletes. Some good stuff on creatine. They did a new study showing that creatine does not necessarily cause baldness. Everyone in the industry probably agrees with that, but that's one of the creatine questions I get almost all the time now of, oh, look at all these bald people who take creatine. And I'm like, I still have a fair amount of hair,
Yeah.
even though it's getting completely white. And I've been taking creatine since literally 1994. I haven't lost
That's
all
when
my hair.
that's
Again,
when
if
it
you
was a
want to go
steroid.
anecdotals. Say again?
That's when it was a steroid was in 1994.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And then there's a new caffeine supplement. I talked about this 2 years ago from ISSN called D9 caffeine. And it is a deuterated form of caffeine. So they basically replace some of the bonds on it. So it is out in the C4 line now from Nutrabolt. I can't remember, is it Alpha Bomb, I think, is the product. I haven't tried it yet, but shout out to Dr. Chris Lockwood, all the guys at C4 and everybody there. Nice to actually support companies that actually do research in addition to product innovation, which I think, unfortunately, in the supplement world, that's dying out, although there's still companies that do it. So hopefully there'll be more of them. So that was cool to see because I talked to the guys at their booth a couple of years ago for quite a while. And there's not, I mean, there's a lot of safety data and everything on that, but the profile, it appears to change the profile of caffeine where it looks like it has this longer half-life and then drops more. But the interesting part was they were saying it didn't seem to affect sleep. So that was my first question of, do I really want a super long-acting caffeine molecule? But it seems to have more positives than negatives. Obviously, paraxanthine is another option in the market too. Paraxanthine is the one of the downstream metabolites from caffeine. It does seem to have some unique properties to it. Side note, my new rant that I hate is that be careful when you buy products that say caffeine free on them now. A lot of times, not all the time, but there's at least one company, I won't say their name, that uses a high dose paraxanthine in its place. So is it technically caffeine free? Yes, but you're using a downstream metabolite of said caffeine. Because people are using it and they're like, oh, wow, this feels great. This feels like caffeine, but there's no caffeine in it. And then I get a few people who are like, man, I took this at night and I can't sleep. I don't know what's going on. There's no caffeine in it. And I'm like, send me the product. And I was like, oh, paraxanthine. That's a caffeine derivative, which I don't think is bad. I think it has some very unique properties, but just be advised, read the label, know what you're doing because it is still a stimulant. Yeah. So I
So
thought that was pretty interesting.
yeah, that is super interesting. So there was D9, right? That was the
Yep.
caffeine, a little like a different. It's a different form, or it's like what?
I don't 100% understand the process, to be
Yeah.
honest. So they do something that's called the process called deuteration, where you're shooting, I think it's different hydrogen molecules at it. I'm sure some physics person out there is going to be screaming at their screen now. I don't understand it, to be perfectly honest. Like it slightly changes the chemical bonding of it, but it's still caffeine. That's where it gets confusing. But for
Mm.
example, we know that in the body, for example, take amino acids. Amino acids are typically labeled D and L amino acids. Like L amino acids, with the exception of maybe one or two, are the main amino acids. But if you look at the D and the L isomer, they're like your hands. Like they're literally the same, but they're mirror images of each other. And so the D amino acids are not used a whole lot in the body. There's some debate they might be used for maybe healing, and they may have different functions that just haven't been explored yet. But almost all the amino acids that we know of that are used for protein synthetic response and all that kind of stuff are the L amino acid. So even just literally on paper, the exact same thing, but having the bonds set up in a mirror image of each other radically changes like how they function in the body. And this
It's
is not
interesting.
changing chemical structure at all. So my understanding is it's more along that sort of line of tweaking than it is actually changing the molecular setup itself, because it's still caffeine.
But you said it had a longer half-life, or to where like I guess it didn't like peak as quickly. It was a little bit longer, but
Yeah,
it didn't
it
impact sleep, you said?
Yeah, in the earlier studies, they showed some graphs, which again was a very limited human studies. It was, I think it was primarily the pharmacokinetics, that it would peak and then it would hold this line and then drop. Where caffeine, normally you'll see more of a peak and then it more comes down a little bit faster. So it reminded me more of like what some of the work on paraxanthine looks like. And I want to say it was for quite a while. And my first question was, wow, like these people, like the timing they did, like the peak level was still higher than I would expect in the evening. And so I was asking them about, is there any effects on sleep and all that kind of stuff? And even though it was, I don't remember the exact time course, maybe 9, 10 hours after administration. And they said, anecdotally, so far, no, which is, so it, I don't know enough about it. I don't know if there's been enough studies to show exactly what's going on. They have all the safety and the grass and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely been shown to safe. I don't think there's any safety concerns that I've ever made aware of. But I think in terms of the exact pharmacology of it or exactly how it works, I think there's a lot more work to still be done. And maybe because they're slightly tweaking the molecule, it just has different properties and maybe it doesn't behave quite as what we think it does. I don't know. I interrogated the poor bastards like 2 years ago for 2 hours at their booth, and they were super nice about it. They were super good, and they had done a lot of the research and everything ahead of time, which is very expensive. But yeah, it's like anything else. It's relatively new. You just have a lot more questions you don't know than anything else.
Yeah, I'm looking at C4, the alpha bomb. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically it says the D9 caffeine enhanced modification of conventional caffeine that helps increase and sustain energy, which is
Yep.
interesting, right? Because you is that, I guess my thought would be the same thing of, is that what, would you want that? But yeah, I guess there is some benefit to it. But it says caution on it too. This is an interesting kind of marketing on it. It's like a literally a bomb looking
Yeah.
thing, and it says caution. And wow, that's interesting. Kind of makes me want to try it. I haven't had a pre workout for a while, but kind of makes me want to try
Yep.
it.
I'm actually, it's on my list of stuff to try. I played around a fair amount with paraxanthine and I don't mind it. I don't think paraxanthine is going to be shown to be superior to caffeine. I get a little annoyed at some of those ads. And I get that everyone metabolizes caffeine a little bit different. There's fast metabolizers and slow metabolizers. And I spend way too much of my blood, sweat, and tears into the ISSN position stand on caffeine as one of the second authors and stuff. But I think paraxanthine is interesting. I think it's probably more work to be done in that area. Part of it's also that I still kick myself because I remember looking at research on caffeine for years and looking at the downstream metabolites, theobromine and theophylline, and performance enhancement stuff like really didn't really pan out too much. Theophylline maybe in some niche cases, but you might have more side effects and stuff like that. And I remember looking at paraxanthine going, yeah, this is the main metabolite of caffeine. I'm sure people have studied this for years. And I literally didn't bother to look at any of the research. I remember talking to, I think it was Ralph Yeager at ISSN 2 or 3 years ago, and asking him that. And he's, oh, yeah, there's a bunch of really interesting potentials with paraxanthine that nobody has really ever looked at. And I'm like, what? Like, how can there be like, and he was right. There is not, up until the last couple of years, there's not a ton of data on it. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, how did I miss that? And I realized I went back and I was thinking, I looked at my notes and went, oh yeah, I made the assumption that this is known and people must have looked at it, and I didn't double check that myself. So, yeah. Mental note, if
I was
you're
gonna
on the more
say,
research side and you're reading research, don't ever assume that everybody's reading the research, because what I've realized over time is almost nobody's reading any research. Like literally almost nobody is reading any research. Go pick your favorite, what do you think is your favorite topic, and just look at how many downloads some articles have. Like some of the more popular position stands and stuff that gets more popular, you will get a lot of downloads on that. But I would say most publications, if you consider that this is going out across the World Wide Web to the entire world, and you've got maybe 1,200 downloads, that's not even people who read it. That's not even people who bothered to download it. I don't know how many people have read it. So I would say a lot of research still just goes completely unread and definitely not applied.
yeah, that's interesting, especially, yeah, like you said, just with how many people are on the internet and things like that. And you would think that the way some people talk that they do read every last little bit of it. So
Yeah, I won't name any names, but there's people I know who I trust. When they tell me they've read something, I believe them, and there's other people who cite a whole bunch of studies, and I'm like, I don't think they've ever read a damn
they
thing.
don't even know what they're saying. I just had
No.
a couple quick questions real quick about like heat and cold, if you don't
Yeah,
mind, real quick. So I'm doing the phys cert, and
cool.
so I think, like I said, I just did the heat and cold side of things,
Awesome.
and I was just gonna ask you a few questions around that. I guess real quick though, just in case, so what was your kind of thought on the phys cert? Was it like, again, I think it's a cool concept, and so I'm just curious to hear it from you in terms of, or just so the audience can know there.
Yeah, so the level one I have is like the flex diet certification, which is definitely more on the nutrition, a little bit of basic recovery. Like we do talk about NEAT and sleep and things like that, but it's more on the nutrition side. And it's based on the concept of metabolic flexibility combined with flexible dieting. And then after I did that, I was like, okay. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool idea how it's applied to physiology. But what if we took that whole concept and just apply it to you as a human organism? So I just coined it physiologic flexibility. And the thought is, okay, so let's say you're getting a B in most nutrition and recovery, and your exercise is not like a trash bin fire, right? So you got the three basics good. Your exercise is good, nutrition is good, and your sleep is good. Like you're getting a B in all those. Like, what do you do next? Like, how would you increase your recovery? Obviously, I think aerobic training is a big component of that, but I would probably bin that in the exercise bin area. So I'm like, okay, so how do you make yourself as a human organism more flexible? I think that is like the next level to become more, increase your recoverability, become more anti-fragile, be able to handle more stressors and more insults. Because even if you just want to train, that'll allow you to train more. If you want to be a busy person at work or have more energy at home, like it will allow you to do more of the things you want to do. And so what I came up with then is, okay, let's go more looking at this as a human organism. But then, what does that actually mean? There's tons of systems we can target in physiology. What system would I, or what grading would I use to figure out which ones are important? What I came up with is you have things that are called homeostatic regulators, things that your body 100% has to hold constant. Otherwise, you die. So, temperature being number one, right? Most humans are 98.6, it's actually 97.7. Two would be pH. You have to hold pH incredibly tight in the blood, or else you have a whole host of problems. Again, fuels, which I expanded out to include lactone and ketone, or lactate and ketones. And last one is oxygen and CO2. Like all those things you have to hold incredibly tight. Like at any one point, like your body only has like 1 teaspoon of blood glucose. And if you add even a fraction more of that, like your blood glucose skyrockets and you have issues. I'm like, okay, cool. So we have to hold all those things constant. And then the thought is there's a buffer zone on each end. So if you look at temperature, humans are able to exercise in hot environments. They're able to do jump in cold water. So there's a buffer zone around that of what I call just kind of your adaptation. And the greater your adaptation is to that area, I think you have an increased physiologic flexibility. Or another way to think of it is like what I call HDR, or human dynamic range. Like you can go from a hot environment to a cold environment, and your body temp will stay around the same. So for pH, you could do a lot of horrible, like 30-second repeat wind gates and build up a ton of lactate and hydrogen ions. And if you've got a well-developed buffering system and a good aerobic base, you can buffer those insults, and we can see how that translates into your performance by being able to do that output again in less rest period. Same thing with CO2, O2, breath holds, all that kind of stuff. So the thought pattern is that, okay, these things that we're holding constant, that's true, but I think each of those components are actually incredibly trainable. And I don't think anybody is really training them in a systemic way where all of them are also related to each other. There's something called a cross physiologic adaptation that hasn't been published a whole lot yet. So one of the studies they did is they exposed people to cold water immersion. The other group they did not. And then both people they put in a hypoxic environment. So an environment that's very low in oxygen. What they found was the group that was just previously exposed to cold water immersion, they reported that they did better in the hypoxic environment, even though they both got like the same level of low oxygen. And so you're like, wait a minute, like temperature and your ability to regulate oxygen, that doesn't make any sense. And in the background, there's actually these factors that are cross adaptation. So I think that when you get better in one area, there's a transfer to the other areas, right? It's like the old Pavel Tsatsouline thing of, hey, I did kettlebell swings and my deadlift went up. I'm sure as shit. Like a kettlebell swing doesn't look like a deadlift, but more than enough people have reported that happening in certain instances. There's probably a transfer for some people from a kettlebell swing to an actual deadlift, even though they don't look like each other. So I think there's transfer that we haven't even uncovered yet between all these other different systems. And if you upregulate all of them, I think you'll just be much more robust, anti-fragile, and just generally a lot harder to kill.
And the thing too is you talk about stress and like almost like I guess this would almost like improve your stress resilience as well
Yep.
too, right? So I would imagine that some of these things you mentioned this being like a next level thing, but I would imagine some of this doesn't necessarily have to be next level. Obviously, again, if someone's not exercising, we want to make sure they're exercising, right? If they're not,
Yep.
if they're just eating straight shit all the time, it's okay. We got to work on that.
Yeah.
Sleep, again, same thing there. But I would imagine you don't necessarily have to be like super advanced either to do this. And I would imagine that doing these things you can do in conjunction with that, and you're going to find that you can just handle everyday stressors much better. That's how I
Yep.
kind
Yeah,
of conceptualize
exactly.
it.
So for trainers and coaches, my pitch to them is this is, in my opinion, the sort of the next level, the more advanced stuff, but exactly what you said. You can, in the background, I've been doing this for years to my own private clients and not even telling them. I bake a lot of these concepts like into their training. Oh, you're doing zone 2, and we know that your CO2 retention sucks. Your nasal breath hold is a nasal exhale test is like 15 seconds. All right, you're going to do zone 2, but I want you to do it with a longer exhale. Or you're going to take a walk, and I want you to, when you're walking, to do a 6 second exhale. Or when we do your intervals, I'm going to have you more on the shorter end of the spectrum. So you might be on the 90-second intervals because I really want to stress that pH part of your system. Or we're going to do a 24-hour fast. And maybe we're going to look at ketone levels in the background. Or we're going to see how fast you can get into a state of ketosis. So I just take all these concepts, or you want to do more recovery and you've got a sauna. Great. And I'll expose you to heat, or you've got access to cold. So I'll do a lot of these things in the background and just push them into their current program as part of the program, not really a separate thing.
And like for example, in your specific, like last night, you said you had a concert. You're at 12, or you're out till what, midnight? You said, or something like that. Like
Yeah.
again, a lot of people are like, "Hey, I got to have this like perfect routine and things like that." And so to me, it's yeah, we want to build those things. We want to focus on sleep. We want, but like when things like that inevitably pop up, the thing is that going to be something that derails you for an entire day, or is, hey, can you bounce back from that like super quick as well too? And I'm assuming these things help you with that a little bit as well too.
Oh, yeah. I think I'll throw myself in this bin too. As trainers and coaches, we've done a bad job of preparing clients historically for the real world. Our mode and go to, and this was me for way too long, is just optimize your environment. Like just change all your environment, throw out all your junk food, get a home gym. And yes, people do all that stuff? Yes. Should your environment be better? Yes. All things considered, is environment probably a rule above a lot of other things? Yes. However, we should also prepare clients to, shocker, play in the real world. If they're going to go out to a social event, what do they do? If they want to go to a concert, what do they do? I like doing kiteboarding and stuff like that. I may go ride for 3 hours in a row. We, I think, should prepare their physiology to better handle those things that they want to do, because I think those are the things that also make life interesting and fun. And you can't, it's an unrealistic expectation to live your life as a monk and pretend you're going to be a bodybuilder and all your food has to be pre-prepared and do all this preparation stuff. Does that work? 100%. Of course it works. But I usually find those people have a very hard time if they go out or they do anything that's outside of the normal. And if you think about like most of probably the better memories you've had in your life, it's probably not the day you ate chicken and broccoli and got to lift. Like those days are cool. Like I like
Yeah.
doing that, but it's probably an experience. It's probably going somewhere. You probably didn't have the best sleep, probably didn't eat the best food. Now, again, if we go back to the eustress distress model, you can't also expect to do that every day and make progress either, right? But I think those are the experiences that make life interesting. And I think if you can prepare your physiology ahead of time to better handle those and bounce back from those, it allows you to paradoxically be more consistent in time. So, like today, I'm a little bit tired, but I'm not really changing any of my training or doing anything particularly different. I was like, oh, it's one night, it'll be okay. Where in the past, I'd be more worried about it. My energy level would be a lot lower. Everything would feel a lot harder. it would just be harder for me to just get back to normal again.
And two, I guess it's also based on like evolutionary kind of context as well too, where it's
Yeah.
like these are things that we naturally had to do, and like in today's modern environment, like none of
Yep.
these things we don't have to do anymore. So we need to seek these out. Like the temperature side of things, it's like everyone's super comfortable. Like they anytime it's a little uncomfortable, they don't want to do anything or they can't do it. And we're just used to that. But we have this kind of built-in mechanism where we can adapt to these things, and it's just something that we don't have to do anymore.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're running the experiment of removing so many stressors and we're doing it unconsciously. And again, it our physiology is programmed for that. Like we're programmed to survive. Like I remember this is years ago, I was probably before COVID when I was working at a co-working place. I was really working on getting my step count up to consistently 14 to 15,000 steps a day. And drove my car, get down to the co-working place, and I parked in a ramp. And I realized by day 3, the cars that go all the way down to the end, and there's cars that weren't parked in that area. And so I would cut across through the cars to get to the door. And I realized I'm like, oh shit, like I am unconsciously shortening the path, even though consciously I'm literally trying to get more steps. Like I'm conscious of what I'm doing, but your wiring is such that you are always seeking efficiency. Because in the past, food wasn't secure. Now I can push buttons on this crazy brick I call an iPhone in my hand, and food shows up at my door and gets taken away from some online account that I don't even see. I don't even hand the person money anymore. We're now like everything is given towards us, but our wiring is still that efficiency. And we know that when we remove those stressors, everything goes backwards. We throw people up into space, microgravity, like they lose bone, they lose muscle, everything gets redistributed. And so they have to actively do countermeasures to prevent that. And I think we've gotten better of realizing that, what that entails for exercise and nutrition. But I think we've done a horrible job as to environmentally, what does that mean? Like, especially temperature regulation. Like I said, we're running the experiment of always being at a happy, constant temperature. And I like that. I like air conditioning. I live in Minnesota. It gets warm in the summer. I have crazy things that cool my bed temperature and all this stuff. But I know I'm doing that most of the time. So I'm also actively seeking to get out of my comfort zone to counteract that. And the crazy part is, to our benefit, I don't think you need to do a lot of that. Like yesterday, I did a 40-degree cold water immersion for 2 minutes. I exercised in the heat. It was probably like 86 degrees outside, was sweating my balls off. But now I got both heat and cold. Total exposure time, cold was only 2 minutes. Heat, maybe my total exercise session, maybe 40 minutes. So it's not a lot. I don't think we need to try to match this one by one, or you have to be a heretic and throw out your air conditioning and not heat your home or do all this crazy stuff. But I do think you have to be somewhat intentional about applying a higher intensity stimulus to counteract it and to move those adaptations to a better direction.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people, when they talk stress, they think it's a negative thing. But my understanding of it and how I view it is like a lot of people have too many poor stressors that are taking it up, and then their bucket's super small. And so what we're doing here is we're obviously lowering that, but then also raising your capacity to be able to handle more. That's how I visualize it as best as I can with this.
Yeah, I agree. I've used that same analogy with HRV, is that most people have a bucket that's full of holes, right? And they're like, oh my God, my HRV is so low. If the HRV is the thing in the water content, yeah, you maybe shouldn't sleep 4 hours a night. You should sleep at least 6 or 7 or 8 or more. You probably shouldn't have 2 liters of coffee a day. Like you shouldn't snort pre-workout off the counter before you go to train. Like you have so many holes in your bucket. Like your green things are Skittles, not actual vegetables. You need to plug all the holes in your bucket. But once you've done that and it's reasonably not leaking so much anymore, now you need to make this the size of the bucket bigger. So now how do you train yourself, like you said, to handle more and bigger stressors? So the big one there is obviously going to be VO2 max aerobic, but then I would do just the pillars in the phys flex cert: temperature, pH, expanded fuels, CO2 and O2. I think if you train in those areas, which again doesn't mean you have to do a ton, you're actually going to make that bucket bigger. And so it will allow you to handle more stress than over time.
Yeah, it's super interesting concept to me. It's something that I've really been just like super interested in, which obviously is why I wanted to do the Phys Flexor. So just two quick questions, and we'll wrap this up because you've been more than generous with your time. So I just had, so heat adaptations, like you said, it's easy. I have a garage gym as well too, so it's like super easy, right, to get that heat adaptation. I feel
Yeah.
like in the summer there. Now in the winter, I don't have access to a sauna. What do you suggest in that situation? Just try and find a sauna somewhere, or how can we get that? Or can exercise maybe in here inside where I'm on the bike? Can that be my heat adaptation during that time? And I lose that adaptation potentially.
Yeah, you can do both. I live here in Minnesota. I train in my garage. I do have a heater in my garage now, so I can keep the bars out there so my hands don't freeze and stick to them. But I'm cheap, so I only heat it to 43 degrees, just enough where my hands don't feel like they're going to fall off the bar. So I actually prioritize thermal adaptations depending upon the context. So if I'm at home, I'm probably doing some type of cold water immersion. That might be not necessarily walking down to a temperature, but just staying at a particular temperature. And then for heat exposure, I will prioritize depending on where I'm going. I've found over the years that once you're pretty well heat adapted, like it doesn't take a lot to maintain it. Right? It's just like when you hit your, if you've been training for many decades, it's going to take a while for all your strength to disappear, right? Yeah, you're going to lose some skill. Your top lifts are going to go off. You may run the risk of more soft tissue injuries, but it's going to be weeks to potentially months or longer. It's going to go down, but it's not going to, you're not going to be like, oh my God, I lost 2 decades of training in 4 weeks. It doesn't happen. Same thing with heat. And I found that just one session at 10 to 20 minutes a week, I can keep most of the heat adaptation pretty good because I've tried putting a hat on and putting a sweatshirt on, and you can get to the point in a garage gym where you can start sweating and get enough, a little bit of heat adaptation that way. That is typically what I do in the winter, but it's not the same as the summer. So I just prioritize it depending upon what I have access to and the time of the year. So in the summer, I definitely prioritize more heat just because it's easy to do in the garage. Typically in the winter, I'm prioritizing more cold just because it's easier. But I do tend to travel to warmer locations in the winter. So we'll go to Mexico or Costa Rica or something like that. So I found that just keeping a little bit of that heat adaptation is enough that I don't get my ass handed to me if we go to Mexico or Costa Rica. Costa Rica was amazing, but the humidity there and you're
Yeah.
exercising outside, especially when we go down there in March, was just like, oh, like the first week was just freaking brutal.
So it sounds like again, get it in the summer when you can, like really get those heat adaptations, and then in the winter, it sounds like me coming in here and hitting the bike like that should be enough to maintain it, and I'll sweat and everything like that while I'm doing those sessions, and that should be pretty much
You'll
enough
probably
to
be pretty close. Like I
yeah,
find I can eke out enough there. And if I can just get one sauna session in for 10, 15 minutes, even once a week, I found that made a
it's enough.
huge difference.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wasn't able to do that. I'm a weirdo, so I still have a membership at one of the local gyms just because I like to go somewhere else, get out of my house because I work from my house, and just have 2 days a week that I just get away. And on those 2 days, I'll use sauna there because I have access to it.
Yeah.
Other
That's a
times,
good
even
point.
in the winter, don't really bother too much with it because it's just, again, you're back to what are your priorities or what are you trying to spend your time on?
Yeah.
Now, if somebody came to me and I did a consult with an athlete who did this, who said, hey, I've got a big tournament. It's in Mexico City. It's at elevation. It's at temperature. I've got 3 weeks to prep. What should I do? Yeah, by all means, like we're going to be doing sauna. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff because now that's a high priority. We've got a limited time. And so that would change things. So again, you're back to is your priority? How much time do you want to spend on it? Eh, if I have to suffer for a few extra days and we go on travel and I'm pretty decent, I'm okay with that. If I was a highly competitive athlete, though, that would be different. Obviously, my priority would be higher. And unfortunately, you've seen this happen to athletes where they get to the event, they're just not prepared for the climate, and it can totally wreck people. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Again, priorities are important. So my last, this should be a quick one. So
Yeah.
I don't have access to cold water immersion, but obviously the cold showers is something that interests me. So I usually take my showers in the evening. Is there any detriment to go like doing cold exposure too late, too close to bed?
Yes and no. There is almost no literature I can find that has looked at this. So you're in the land of who knows. Anecdotally, I have found some people can do cold water immersion in the evening and they sleep better. Other people, it's the inverse.
Okay.
Now, I think with a cold shower, usually you can't get your below the skin temp to drop that much. So I haven't noticed too much of an issue with a cold shower, to be honest. But if you have completely like cold water immersion, it can be an issue because
Okay.
that also gets into well, what type of protocol are you doing? So in the PhysFlex cert, I even have it typed up a little protocol sheet of what I use for cold water immersion. So if you're going on the highly sympathetic end of the spectrum, you're going to go as cold water as you possibly can get, assuming you can control temperature. You're going to get as much of your skin up to your neck, and you're probably going to be on the shorter time frame, 1, 2 minutes, somewhere around there. What is that going to do? That's going to hit most of the sympathetic nerve endings in the skin. The temp differential is going to be really high, but you don't have a lot of time to really accumulate there or get much of an internal temp difference. But it'll be like taking 2 cups of coffee if you're not used to it. Like you definitely feel better. There's been a couple studies showing dopamine increase, epinephrine, all that stuff increases. Now, would I want to do that right before bed? Hell no, because that's the opposite of what I'm trying to do before bed. However, we've used this, I got this from Cal Dietz and some other guys too, is you can do the inverse of that. So if I go all the way to the other end and I say, okay, I want to be as parasympathetic as possible. I want to literally take the gas pedal and or the brake and jam it down the floor as hard as I can. You can do what's called a mammalian dive reflex. So you can even just hold water in your mouth. You can do a breath hold. Do not do any hyperventilation or anything like that before. Just hold your breath. We don't want any shallow water blackouts or anything like that. And then stick as much of your face into the cold water as you can, and then hold your breath there. I'm trying to get a video of this, but I'll probably have to have somebody help me. I've done this post exercise where my heart rate's been like 120, 130 by the time I get to the cold water, and you can watch it drop into the 70s within seconds.
Wow.
Because when you see cold water on the primarily the vagus nerve, then that's a hardwired response in mammals to start slowing heart rate, to start slowing everything down as a survival mechanism. So you can use that to try to get people who have really hard time to downregulate. You've seen that weirdly that it's popular now on the internet, like the face plunging, like
Yep.
kind of the same idea. And it does seem to work. Now, my caveat with that is you can go too far on that. And we've had some athletes where we've downregulated them for 24 to 48 hours, which may not be the best if you have a big competition the next day. You can play with the stimulus there to your degree. And for some people who have a really hard time downregulating at night, that can be useful. So again, answer is it depends. And the cool part about cold water is you can use it on either end of the spectrum. And there's obviously a bunch of different things in between.
Interesting. So it sounds like the shower aspect of it, as long as I'm not doing it right before bed, it's probably just see how I feel more than anything. But it's probably because it's a shower versus cold water immersion, it's likely not going to impact sleep, is what you're saying. But it
That's what
could.
I found. I have found that exercise can severely impact sleep,
Oh, yeah.
which the higher intensity, some people are just way more sensitive to it. I could do a moderate session, like no stimulants before, even as boring as it is, like not listen to as much death metal and just go through the motions, not even really with no psych up or anything like that. I can't even do that 4 hours before bed. Like my sleep is still just bad. I don't know why. I can do things like the mammalian dive reflex and breath work, and I can do things to counteract it if I have to, but just left on my own devices for whatever reason, I'm like really sensitive to that, where other people are not as sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried not to like obviously we have a new child. He's 10 months. So it's like
Yeah.
there's gonna be time like there's been a few times in that 10 months where I've had to work out a little bit
Oh,
later.
sure.
And I've noticed it. Again, that's where to circle big picture to come back to what we've talked about. So that's where you can be smart with managing your intensity, I think, and that can help you out
And
there.
then it goes
So
back to the question I have clients ask themselves all the time, and this has happened to me is okay, it's 7:30 at night. I have an hour session to train. Do I do the session or not? Okay, I'm gonna look at my schedule and be like, oh man, if I don't do this session tonight, it's gonna be 2 days before I can do anything again. So the question is, would I be better doing the session or not? Probably I'm gonna do the session, and I'm
yeah,
gonna try to worry about sleep a little bit on the other side. Again, is that a perfect scenario? No, it's not. But I'm probably gonna see long-term benefit from still doing the session versus skipping it entirely. Maybe I'll cut it in half. Maybe I'll add some zone 2 stuff at the end to try to downregulate and add some more longer breath works. I'm going to try to downregulate myself more on the back end to counteract it, but I'm probably still going to be better overall by doing it versus skipping it.
yep. Same thing with, oh, hey, is this food good or bad? It's okay. Let's look at the big, is it like in isolation? It's hard for me
Yeah.
to say. We got to look at the big picture here. Dr. Mike, really appreciate your time, man. Went over time. So I appreciate you sticking around here for this. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, anything coming out on your end that you want to let them know about?
Yeah, so probably the best place, 90+% of my content goes out to the newsletter. So you can get on there. We'll send you a free gift. Just go to miketnelson.com. There'll be a little button at the top that says newsletter. And then I do have a podcast, which is the Flex Diet Podcast. So you can check that out. And then I do have some information online and social media and Instagram primarily, which is just Dr. Mike T. Nelson.
Awesome. Dr. Mike, appreciate your time, man, as always. And we'll talk to you again here soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.